he was still making the women in the ponds, which I loved those paintings, I really did. And but he was just about he was still showing with the Fishback Gallery. He was not in Marlborough yet. And he but he was really in the landscape. One of the good things about Neil was that he was such a dynamic and intelligent teacher. He really was a bright man, and he was very well read, and really, you knew you were really with a smart person when you were talking to Neil. You know that. I mean, he was a bright guy. But another thing about him was he was really, in a funny way, looking for disciples. He wanted you to buy in to all of his ideas as tightly as you could. And for me, that wasn't what I wanted to do. And so I was always attracted to these people that were sort of slightly different. And he had trouble with that, and he would express it with me at times. And it leads to a funny story. The last critique, the last my last month at Penn, I had two interesting critiques. One was with John Schuler. I don't know if you know who John Schuler was, but John Schuler was an abstract expressionist who, during World War II, had been a gunner on a B-17 in one of those little glass turreted rooms. And when he came back to New York after the war, he became an artist. And all of his abstract expressionist paintings always made you think about clouds. And I'm sure it was shaped by hanging in that little glass ball on the bottom of a B-17. Um, and he walked all the way up 6 flights of stairs in the Furness building to my studio. And he comes into the room and he looks around and he said, I know what you want. And he said, you want me to talk about these paintings. He said, but I don't need to. I said, what do you mean? He said, I can tell right now you're always going to be painting. And he said, you know that too. And he said, also, you know, he said, and I know you're going to be good because every painting in this room is not good, but you paint just as hard on the bad ones as you do on the good ones. And you know the difference, but you still hang in there all the way. He said, you'll be fine. So that was his critique, and he left me. And then Welliver, the last time I ever talked to me, comes into my studio. He's looking at the paintings, and he didn't talk about one painting. He decides to tell me this story. He said, when I was studying with Albers, after I graduated, I went to New York and I had a studio for 2 years. All I did was paint. Then I had a show. My work was up. I'm in my studio. The phone rings. I pick it up and I recognized immediately it was Albert's voice on the phone. And he said, Neil, it's Joseph. And he said, I know. He said, Neil, I saw your show. He said, wow, that's great, Joseph. I'm really happy to hear that. He said, Neil, I saw your show 3 times. He said, I'm really moved. That's wonderful. He said, Neil, do you think those paintings have color? And he said, yeah, I do. He said, well, they don't. And he hung up. And he said, we never spoke again. And I said, oh. And then he left. And I said, what the hell did that mean? It has to mean something, but I don't know what it is. So 15 years later, Neil's retiring from teaching. They throw a big party at the White Dog Cafe in Philadelphia. Now, hundreds of former students. So I got there. I was a little late. I come in the door, and there's a curator of prints and drawings at the Philadelphia Museum is standing right by the door, and she knew me. So she starts talking to me. So I'm just standing there and I'm talking. And then I could feel Neil. You know how when he was in the room and you couldn't see him, you could feel him. I turn and I glance and I see him moving through this crowd of people like a shark. And he's just moving across the room and he comes right up to me and he pushes the curator, whose name was Ann Stein, out of the way. He pushes her out of the way and he gets right up against my face and he says, you. And I said, Neil, it's so good to see you for such a long time. And he said, you. And I said, yes, Neil. He said, I've been seeing your work all over the place. And I said, yeah. And he said, it looks good. Keep it up. And then he took his fist and he punched me right here hard enough that I was thrown back. Like it was a good heavy punch. And he turned around and walked away and we never spoke again. But I knew what that other story meant, which was Albers had told him, Neil, I have to respect what you're doing, but I don't. it's not what I wanted you to do. And that was pretty much what he was telling me. I had not gone where he wanted me to go, but he couldn't deny I was going someplace. And it was kind of like a, 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 a Welliver style goodbye. As you know, he was a tough guy, you know, t to the end. I mean, there was he may have had a soft spot in him, but you couldn't find it, you know.